we've got three. I'm Samir Padania. I pulled together this panel on investors in media, partly because I worked in grant making. Philanthropy is supposed to save journalism, as we all know from the op-eds. And to me, it was always interesting that we had a relationship with groups like ones that are represented on the panel here, who have a slightly different approach to investing in the media, to sort of supporting the media through investment of various kinds. And there was a little bit of collaboration between the grant making and the investment community. But really, as somebody who's not a professional investor, not somebody who's grown up in that world, it took me some time to understand how it works, how it operates, what its tenets are, the ways in which they see the world. So this panel is an opportunity to talk to three people who work in various ways in a diversity of markets, but all with an overall overarching kind of mission and interest in the health and future of independent media and communication. So I hope today that's what we'll have, a discussion between these people who are highly expert and extremely interesting. We've done a lot of pre-discussion as well. So Turi raises his eyebrow. But I think what I want to do is get into it pretty quickly. Turi Munter is from North Base Media. Ross Settles is from the Media Development Investment Fund, MDIF, which used to be called the MDLF. And before that, I think it might have been the KLF. And then Mariano Blechman is from Argentina, which is a country. And he's been involved in a range of different sort of sector building initiatives in the digital media sector in both his native Argentina and in wider Latin America, including things like Media Party, but also specifically a vehicle called, an investment vehicle, an accelerator vehicle called Media Factory. So I'm going to ask each of them initially to just talk about really what they do, the process of what they do, how they see the world, and what sorts of things they're looking for as investors, as a sort of opening way of scene setting.
They're kind of dangerous, these things. Hi, I'm Turi Munter, and I'm one of the partners in North Base Media. North Base Media is a VC, a venture capital firm, and we are absolutely not interested in supporting media. We are absolutely interested in investing in great companies which are going to make lots of money and great returns for us. And we think, unlike quite a lot of people, that media is a fascinating, fabulous space for us to be playing. We invest in two areas. We invest in media technology, technologies which will accelerate some of the trends we see in media or help to monetize them, make them more efficient, optimize them. That's half our investment thesis. And the other half of our investment thesis is to invest in media companies, content companies, in, however, specific markets. Those markets that we're interested in we call growth markets, for want of a better term. They're characterized by a number of things that they all have in common. They're large. They have large youth populations. Economics are more or less stable. And they have, almost all of them have got very smug, large, existing media players in that space. So regionally, we focus on Mexico, Brazil, the whole of the Middle East, regional parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, and India.
It says push, yes. Afternoon, my name is Ross Settles. I'm with the Media Development Investment Fund. That's very aggressive, this mic. MDIF is about 20 years old. It is a social investment fund. So while we like to make returns, our mandate is to make sufficient returns to cover the cost of operations, right? So we are a registered NGO, registered not-for-profit in New York. We only invest in the content half of what Turi was talking about. So we don't invest in platforms. We don't really invest in tools of any kind. We only invest in content companies or companies that are proposing to create content. We have 3 working teams. We have a team in Latin America. I work mostly in East, Southeast, and South Asia. And we have a team that is just now forming in Africa and the Middle East. What do we do? My title is what is my title? Senior Advisor Digital Media, which means I spend a lot of time working with companies that are preparing to require some sort of financial support. And we offer support that is quite small, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, up to a couple of $1 million. And we have different instruments and different ways of doing that. I guess that's all I can say. Is enough as an introduction. Roger?
Yep. So, I have a presentation. These guys are very bad with me because I got a PDF with pictures with animals. My name is Mariano Blechman. I'm based in Buenos Aires. These people that you are seeing there is a stairway in Buenos Aires at the end of one conference that we host the last 5 years, which is 2,000 people doing great stuff about innovation in media. I will do a quick intro of what I'm doing right now. I have funded several organizations or bridges. I like to say that I'm a bridge builder. Usually, I'm sometimes not using the proper elements to build bridges. The bridges are intended to connect what people is trying to do on the ground in Latin America with funding, basically. We made a community. We launched the Hacks and Hackers Buenos Aires chapter in 2011, and now it's became the biggest in the world with 7,000 people. A part of this, we've done a data journalist acceleration program, and a Media Factory was the first effort to connect early-stage media content companies with funding, and basically we work with all these two guys for a couple of years. We selected around, we got around 300 companies, and we work with a few of them, and we learn a lot. You know, when you fail, you say you learn a lot. And part of this also was to build a tool to track ideas that's called hack-org. And the idea was that we're doing a lot of hackathons and workshops and a lot of things, and we found that there was too much energy in Latin America that we were not able to track. So we built a tool to track what was happening in hackathon, and now there are 5,000 tracked projects there. So we have all these people in the ground trying to do stuff, and the ecosystem of innovation in media is very short. I'm very hard. So we learn a lot on how to communicate what people is doing, what media organizations are doing, with guys like Ross and Turi, and try to connect this world, because usually journalists has no idea how to prepare their companies or their endeavors to get funding. So that's the only thing I will talk right now. I'm happy to open the discussion, Samir. I have more pictures of animals later, so.
Well, that's a very apposite segue, because my first question to you was one that was fed to me by Joris Luijendijk, the Dutch journalist, last night, who said that one of the ways he tries to get, I mean, obviously we've got a lot of technical jargon that comes up through the process of discussing investment, things like that. So I felt that one of the things that would potentially connect those like me who are not quite so familiar with all the ins and outs of all the jargon would be that if you could characterize yourself, if you were to describe yourself as an animal, you, in your environment, as an animal, what kind of animal are you as an investor?
So I put some animals there. That's not really organized, but basically they are. You can see a lot of people. You can see this picture in two ways. One is investors looking for a startup. The other way is startups looking for an investor. I
can't see what is it.
So it's basically lions gonna buy.
They're gonna eat it.
And it's gonna eat someone. So that's how I am in the middle of both worlds, and basically this is how I see this world, which is startups hunting for investor, and investor hunting for something, some kind of thing. Yeah.
That's a good question. Sorry. It's a good question. So we're more of a development. I mean, we're more of a developmental investor, and investment for us would include, would include everything from the investment of human capital. So we'll do training, we'll bring in expertise, as well as capital, right? So for us, we would be a patient investor. So if I had to choose an animal, maybe a water buffalo. Something that is quite patient but a little persistent. Now, Tori, sorry.
I'm going to duck that question. But there are, picking up from where you leave off, we're a different kind of investor, and we spend quite a lot of time talking to media companies who shouldn't be taking money from people like us. They perhaps should be taking money from people like Ross or Mariano, but really not from people like us. I'm going to back up, and you can just tell me when to stop talking. There's a big difference between media companies and tech companies. And most VCs do not invest in media companies. They haven't for a long time. There's been a huge growth in the valuations of some of that I suppose, second phase of digital media companies, the BuzzFeeds, the Vices, the Voxes, which is now really coming off, and it's frightened lots of investors away from that space now. But the real reason is that they can't see the stratospheric growth. And the reason that VCs, the VC model is predicated on what's called the power law, which essentially means you screw up 80% of the time, but then in that 20% you have a few companies that look like they might work, and you have one or two companies that look like they might be Google. So all tech VCs drive the investments that they make to that kind of on that trajectory. Most media companies shouldn't go on that trajectory, and so I'm going to bring it back to the animal analogy and not find an animal, but we are only looking for companies that are ready for that ride. We only look for media companies, which can maybe not aim for billions of dollar valuation, but can certainly reach really serious scale. And so I have an animal. We are like a remora, like the baby fish that attaches itself to the shark. Except we're a remora with a massive propeller on its tail. And if the shark is not ready, to be propelled by that remora, we'd recommend, stop me right now.
Well, yesterday when we talked, you talked about this triad of ways in which you look at media companies and whether they can go in that direction. So maybe you can sort of start by talking through that.
Okay. I want to apologize to anybody who was at the last panel I was talking about, because I'm just going to say the same thing. We look for the reasons that I was just explaining around VC and the kind of trajectory that we need, we look for what we could call non-linearity in certain key areas of the businesses that we invest in. So a good, solid media business that should not take VC money is one where you put X in and you always end up with 1.5X as it plows through that business. What we're looking for are companies where you can put X in, and year one it does 2X, year two it does 5X, year three it does 10X, etc. The way we get that is by looking for a real unfair advantage, super smarts, in I think 3 areas. I think, is this what I was talking about yesterday? The first is content, and so a system, a team, and an understanding of the market which means that this media company is building content which is truly differentiated, is spectacular content, defensible in that sense. The second is distribution, and what we're looking for there is a teams. In every single case that I've looked at over the course of the last year or so, that is a chief technology officer who's obsessed with data, a genius data analyst, and a fantastic editor-in-chief that is able to feed that stuff through, where you're able to build real scale at cost and at speed that nobody can compete with. And the last piece, I suppose, is the engine, is the whole process. Sort of it's the ops of the media organization, which is able to tie the content production and the distribution together in as optimized a way as possible. Because at base, perhaps what you're saying is that you're building a company which is bringing value to, will bring the most value to the largest number of people in their segment. It can be a niche, but the most value to the most number of people at the lowest cost.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see the difference between a for-profit VC and a not-for-profit social investor. So we go through a series of stages. So first you have to be We evaluate the content. So we start with content. Then we evaluate the market, and our markets are much less strategically chosen than the ones that North Base would be. So we would invest in a country like Laos, which is maybe 2 million people. Very hard to make a traditional 2x, 4x, 6x investment in Laos. But we will still look at investments in places like Laos or Cambodia, which are quite small. And then we invest along a huge continuum. So we'll invest in incubating companies like Media Factory, which Mariano ran, all the way up to quite large companies that are a portfolio of kind of investment products that would include something like a traditional commercial loan. So a newspaper in the process of transitioning to digital. It sounds like ancient history to many of you in this room, but if you're in India, that's actually a real scenario, right? So you are 1.5 million daily copies, huge online audience, but the two parts of the business don't really work together in the way that Turi is describing, kind of data, content drives interaction, interaction drives data, and data then redrives content. And along the continuum, we have a whole lot of different investment products, everything from a commercial loan, collateralized commercial loan, to an angel investment of a couple of $10,000 or $15,000. And for us, the hard thing is coming up with matching the right investment product, whether it's an investment in human capital or an investment in actual cash, to the scenario. And we kind of balance out. Hopefully, we'll have one or two big plays like Turi's describing, but we'll also have a lot of 1.5x's that exit in 5 or 6 years.
So basically, we are based in Buenos Aires, and we have a strong community there, and we receive a lot of demand of early-stage media company willing to have funding. So part of my role is trying to connect these early-stage companies with different kind of players like MDIF, North Base Media, or Media Network, Knight Foundation, and whatever it is. So we've learned a lot about the kind of mistakes that companies do, and also the kind of mistake what companies do when you give them some money to start something. For Latin American perspective, where the ecosystem is not that developed, we found that there are a couple of issues that are usually repetitive. So one is from our world is like funding is not enough, mostly in early stage media companies. So if you give funding to a company who's not used to get funding, you will also have to offer some mentorship on what to do with the money. But if you offer some mentorship on what to do with the money, you will need to work with the team to see if that mentorship is being transferred internally in the company. And if you build a team, you have to understand if this company has a mental concept of innovation. So if they are ready to change or disrupt the market. At the end, what we've learned is that we need like a systemic support and follow with these companies in a long run. The short acceleration process of 3 months doesn't really work very well in our markets. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about those different kinds of markets. You know, we've talked in the past a lot about China and East Asia, and that's where you, Ross, are very highly specialized. And you've talked a lot about the different kinds of approaches and opportunities there that you're seeing, and the sort of, do you want to drill into some of the things that you're finding that are interesting?
So we have a handful of strategic markets, just like Turi does, just like North Base does. China is one that we use more as it's kind of a petri dish because there's so many interesting things going on. And in that market, you have big plays like, actually one just announced an investment this morning. Toutiao announced a $1 billion investment at $11 billion valuation. Sequoia, so a very traditional Silicon Valley VC. But there's a lot of very interesting, almost mom and pop shops, people that are quite specialized in a specific type of reporting, and they may monetize that very narrow niche through e-commerce, advertising, research products, paid content. And that is actually an interesting case because all of the tools of putting all of that revenue together are actually quite easy for an individual or a small collection of people to work on. And those tools are increasingly kind of percolating through Southeast Asia and East Asia. So
what are you finding in the different kinds of places that the way in which you invest? Is it very, very, are you encountering different kinds of problems that are sort of forcing you to think differently about the way you approach it? Or because the kinds of, obviously you have an overall thesis, but you're working in some senses, they're highly diverse cultural environments. So what's coming back to you from those environments as an investor? What's changing about how you think? What are you spotting that's interesting?
So the partnership at North Base is for, I mean, it's much like this panel, in fact. It's for Western men. And that's not ideal. Some of my partners have been involved in media for very, very long, not to say how old they are. But collectively, we've been involved in the Western media space for an extremely long time. And I think probably there was an element of hubris when we kicked off, which was the assumption that having sat, one of my partners managed the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, having seen the changes there, another partner was the chief operating officer of Reuters. Again, massive changes there. I've been involved in startup world. The sense was we're ahead of the curve. We've seen some of the future when it comes to these developing markets. And of course, it's been gratifying to realize that it's almost the opposite. In fact, part of the necessity being the mother of invention, we see quite a lot of media cases, especially around distribution, which start off in China with WeChat, now move to WhatsApp across India, etc., and are slowly percolating over. Messaging as, I suppose, a classic example of this, right? So in the US and EU, messaging was a one-to-one communication tool. One of our companies, in fact, 2-3 years ago, realized that many hundreds of millions of cell phone users in India have limited data plans, which include only really WhatsApp as a free data source. He realized that at that point there was going to be a huge demand for content that they couldn't access in any other ways, and built a news service like the old Yahoo homepage, horoscopes, cricket scores, Bollywood gossip, some news, and just shipped it across WhatsApp, which is, as many of you will know, notoriously difficult. WhatsApp is hell to work with. But nevertheless, put this thing together, has now got more than 4 million daily active users engaging with all that content. F8 last year, so 2 years after this guy had really started pushing this out, F8 Facebook starts having this conversation around bots, starts having this conversation around personalization. A year ago, it's still terrible, it still doesn't work, there's going to be an upgrade at this next F8. But you see that actually trends come from all directions, I suppose. To answer your point around specificity of markets, of course there is specificity. We work in the Middle East. There's lots of things you can't say in the Middle East. The media organization, the media company that we invested in there, treads a very, very tricky line around what they publish, how they deliver their voice, how they stay authentic while also. But actually, when it comes to the rest, so distribution, data, analytics, and all the rest of it, there's huge crossover. There's huge crossover across these, what we call growth markets. There's an enormous amount of learning which goes across all these spaces.
So I may have misunderstood the question a bit, so it's late. One of the things because we don't have our mandate is to support independent editorial voices in kind of emerging markets. And that can be a huge market like India. It can also be quite a small market like Laos. And one of the challenges we have from is what's the right investment vehicle? Is it only training and workshops and kind of media development support? Is it some sort of commercial lending program? Is it some sort of royalty program where we would literally lend without collateral, but against some sort of specific asset creation, whether it's a sales team but one of the challenges when you're not working in a well-developed strategic market is the investment field is kind of all your own. There's not a lot of people playing in Laos. But the problem is there's not a lot of exits, and the instruments that are going to deliver a return are not that clear. And so it's something we struggle with.
Can I ask a few questions to the public? Who is looking for funding here? Raise your hand. Okay. And what are your who already have fundraised well, properly, with success? Cool. We have one. So you have, okay, cool, 2, 3. Okay, that's cool. Usually it's 5% of the people. We got like 100 applications and probably 5 companies that are getting the attention of the investors. So my question is, in what I've learned in Latin America is usually journalists that want to be entrepreneurs have no idea how to prepare their pitches or their companies, or basically if you give them some money, they go to hire more journalists instead of building a business. So I wonder if the crew here want to make some specific questions about all this process of some specific. Sorry, Samir, I'm taking your position here, but I have the feeling that it will be useful if we can share also some specific answers for the crew.
Does anyone have questions now? Yeah, what I'm interested in basically when you look at a company and you try to determine if this is a company that will provide value to you, do you look for that more in the area of, or do you see it as a more promising area, the area of paid content where the readers, the users actually pay for subscriptions, stuff like that, or is it the whole business that is to be generated around the user, the database, you know the user better, and you can start by selling him stuff through affiliate programs, through ads. So what's the thing that you find most valuable in a media-driven business model?
Yeah, well, that depends a lot of the core of the business that you're looking for. If it's content or it's a tech. We work with 3 usual words. One is content, one is tech for media, and the other one is open data also. So that depends of the returns of the people that we are looking for. But at the stage that we work, which is early stage, it's very important to have strong teams, very consolidated in terms of some guy in the business side, some guy in the tech side, some guy in the content side, and also that they're very focused on where they're going, what's their market size, so what problem are they solving in their market. So I think that those are very basic approaches, but we see a lot of journalists that say, I want to have a platform to write about whatever. And they have no idea what's the market size. They have no idea how they are going to make money. They have no idea how to target their audiences. So mostly if they are very focused on what they are doing and what's their size of their business, that's much more interesting for us also. Last year I have a chance to work internally with a company in Buenos Aires called Taringa, which is a social publishing platform. We are still working with them, helping them to organize a little bit. They have 50 million monthly unique visitors. So for them, that they have been in the market for a long time. So one of the major challenge is how to demonstrate to people like these guys that they can make much more money than they have been doing right now. So this is not really a market validation thing. It's really about execution and how do they make more money because in some markets they have 20% of market share already. So that depends a lot of the kind of problem that they are solving and the trust that the team gives to the investors.
So if you're looking at sorry, you want to say something? So if you're looking at emerging markets and you're looking at places that are not quite potentially mature enough to kind of give you your 6x or 10x, do you invest into companies or players that you know are going to fail, but they're laying the groundwork for future investments? And then secondly, also, do you work within your organizations that create deal flow, that kind of cultivate the field, kind of allow innovators to make their first mistakes, and kind of figure out something that works and build the teams and then step in? Or is that just kind of mythology? I mean, yeah.
I'll answer that because I'm the baddie here. So we will never knowingly invest in a company which we think is going to not work. So we're a for-profit business. We have responsibilities to our limited partners, and our job is to try and find the ones which are going to work, which are going to win. We look at very, very early stage companies, and we have the presumption to assume, to hope that we can make the beginnings of a call even very, very early. So we're not there to to fertilize the base. We're there to find the companies, or at that point maybe it's even teams which we think can build that out. In terms of partnerships and networks, that's absolutely fundamental. And here, our deal flow is global, which means we need to have a network of friends all over the world that are looking out for smart teams building interesting products. Those can be local venture capital firms. They can be people like you. They can be people involved in the media industry all over the place. And we're not, I don't think we're doing this altruistically. We are heavily involved in lots of conversations with lots of companies that we will never invest in, because we feel that we have some kind of overview of the market, whether it's key bits of tech innovation, best practice for media companies, new distribution models, funny things to do to Facebook which you can't describe in public, et cetera, that we think we can bring real value. And there we speak to probably somewhere between 50 and 100 times more companies that we invest in, and try and give value back in that way.
So, well, we are not, maybe we're the goodie, but we would also never knowingly invest in a company we thought was going to kind of fail, but provide fertilizer for future generations. We would never do that, because we also have limiteds. They're just nicer, maybe. And the network, it's hard to describe how important it is. And every market, the network is, how do I describe this? The networks are slightly different. They're culturally based. We've done a couple of programs like the one in Argentina and we're doing one right now in Southeast Asia, that is basically trying to develop the concept in teams. And then I was going to actually come back maybe to the earlier question, if I could. So you asked about a particular type of investment thesis, and maybe because our breadth is quite large, we'll do everything from an angel investment to a going concern. Depending on where you are in that, we'll have, if it's an angel investment, we'll look at a team. So concept, well-defined media problem, an idea of how they're going to solve it in a committed team, we'll look at that. So literally, talk to me about your resume, we'll do lots of reference checks. If it's a large going concern that is looking to make a major transition, say, into online video or to build out its digital side, we'll actually look at collateral. You know, do you have a building? Because in the end, that's almost certainly going to be some sort of commercial lending. And the spectrum in between depends on the market, right? So if you're a startup in Southeast Asia, we might look at niche verticals, paid content. If we're in Indonesia, we might look at something that is more advertising driven. So it just depends, the market and where you are in our kind of portfolio of companies.
Wow, we are getting interest now.
Could you give us each one of you give us a case study of your most successful investment, so we have a good concrete idea of what worked?
So because we're a social investor, we are kind of, what do they call it, double bottom line. So for us, a truly successful investment has to deliver returns, both financial returns, and it also has to deliver kind of public discourse, all of the reasons we're interested in independent media. For that, it actually means there's been an exit of some sort, for there to be returns on both sides. Not one that I can describe publicly. But yeah, we've had a couple of exits in Southeastern Europe that were, I would consider, I think MDIF, it was before my time at MDIF, but I think MDIF would consider them quite successful in terms of the role they played in civil society in that market at the time, and our exits were quite healthy.
But those were like in the 90s.
Yeah, it was in the late 90s.
I know what you're talking about, but I wonder now if there's any
I thought you might.
It's instructive for us to hear a success story so that we can know what you're going after. So it's instructive for us to hear a few concrete examples, just so that people know how to model themselves or look for what is working in your viewpoint, because the investments are so few and far between, and being able to prepare yourself for success would be really useful.
I think a little bit of our challenge, or my challenge, is 6 years with the fund. And for this, to actually describe a successful example, you actually have to have an exit, and we are a relatively patient investor. So to my knowledge, we haven't had an exit in the 6 years I've been there. We've had some commercial lending exits where people repaid loans, and that we would consider a success.
So we're a new fund. I'm sorry to be able to add to this. We're a new fund. We're about a year and a half old, so we have also haven't had any exits. But if we look at our media portfolio as a whole, the way we would measure success would be on valuation, right? So we came in at a valuation of X. What does the portfolio as a whole of our media companies look like now? Is it a 2X? Is it a 3X? So in about 18 months, I suppose we are across the media side of our portfolio, we're probably somewhere between 2 and a 3X, which is, and bear in mind some of these companies we've only invested very recently. So there's been real uptick there. I can give you a couple of examples of the media companies that we've invested in. Middle East, I seem to stick there. We invested in a media company which built alone, bootstrapped, a little tech conference in Dubai. They built a tech conference in Dubai. It quadrupled, quintupled every year. We invested it the year 3. And that's about a year and a little bit ago. At the time, they thought that they could build the beginnings of a media property around it, a kind of a regionally specific BuzzFeed, both in English and in Arabic. They started nowhere. A year down the road, they're doing about somewhere between 3 and 4 million uniques a month. They're doing tens of millions of video views today. Small team focused on getting that voice right. So the way they would describe themselves is representing that generation of millennials and below. And by represent, I think they mean 2 things. They mean both reflect and mirror, and also, to the extent that they can, politically, represent, as in take a lead for that generation, if you want. So that's one. Africa media company that we invested in, completely different model, B2B rather than B2C. They're essentially trying to build a mini Reuters for business information across Africa. They started off in Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya, and are building that out gently. There's huge need there because there's very, very little granular data around businesses on the continent. Again, we invested in them about 18 months ago. They've seen a significant uptick in terms of valuations. They're growing fast, and again, all the 3 things that I mentioned right at the beginning. They really understand the way they need to be developing content. They really understand how they should be distributing that, and they're learning as they go. And finally, a really solid engine that they're building out to ensure that that system is fluid and working and optimized. 2 examples.
Sure. I have 3 different cases that I would love to share with you. One is it's a company now is in Ecuador. It's called Jekyll City that work with us. They did a very solid work in the process of investment, and then they went back to their market, and they are still working and making some money. Basically, success also is not die, media. We have another case of basically because the markets are very small in some cases, so they're struggling a lot with making money. There is another interesting case that we had in Buenos Aires that was actually was a grant that we gave through another program called Hacks Labs. They got $10,000 to make a natural language processing startup that was supposed to solve journalistic problems. But then they got funding for VCs from a startup accelerator in Buenos Aires, and then they built a business completely different that was solving a marketing thing. So that's part of the disruption that we have in Latin America. That is, when we have a good idea that can solve a problem on the journalist side, then you have real VCs, and the guy who knows the technology, they really don't care if they're going to solve a journalistic problem or they're going to solve a marketing problem or whatever it is. So we have this kind of disruption. Is that a success in terms of their team? Yes, because we help them to build a team from the scratch, and now they have a company that are doing well, but they have nothing to do with journalism. And there is a third company that we are working right now, it's Chroma EO. It's actually, they came from the workshops that we did in Latin America a couple of years ago. We bring a mentor from BuzzFeed. She started working with them about metrics and analytics and that kind of stuff. And they are right now working with 5 global brands, Washington Post, a couple of more in Latin America. It's a metric system for how content is performing in social network. And the main problem with this is that the market validation is too slow because we are very, very far from, basically the people in Latin America has to move to New York to develop their business, mostly if it is technological focus. So if direct success, I mean, we don't really have like a fund when we expect equity. We take participation in the companies in the process of investment, so we grow if these companies grow, but we don't have this kind of calculation. So our success is more focused on if these people is willing to do what they want to do.
We'll take the last 3 questions if we can bundle them together. We've got. Actually, we have longer. I didn't realize. Yeah, but should we stack the questions up?
Yes, I was just wondering, when you're investing in teams, what you're looking for. Is it chemistry? Is it sort of individual brilliance? Are you looking for a track record?
Looking at the ecosystem in this space, what would be the thing that the sort of the changes that you would like to see in order to feel greater confidence that there's enough deal flow, that there's enough of a pipeline there, that this is a secure space to be investing in, to effectively to make a case to limited partners that they should be investing here rather than in AI or in games or whatever it might be?
Hi, so it's a 2-part question. Are you interested in the US local advertising market? 1, and 2, why should we take your money?
That's a really good question, actually. Why should we take your money? Coming from philanthropy, I also have a question, which is, there's this quote by Jeff Jarvis who says that every time, well, I'm not sure if he says it like this, but he basically says that when philanthropy gives grants to new media initiatives, but also to legacy media, they're practically clipping the wings of potentially successful media projects. I'm just wondering how you look at that from a VC point of view, and whether there could be a better way of collaborating in this space.
I think I have too many questions. Different.
I can give you my notes if you want.
Yeah, please. Please, go ahead.
I think those are all fantastic questions, and there were too many. So in backwards, the point about philanthropy, the thing to media companies, their funding models, their business models, and we need as much in the space as possible. Public sector as well should play into that. I think the key issue that I feel on the board myself of a series of non-profits in the news space is that, as somebody else, as Richard Sambrook said yesterday, supply is not the problem. Great journalism's supply is not the problem. There are lots of brilliant journalists all over the place. The problem, in a sense, is demand. And one of the things which I feel I've seen across a lot of the philanthropy space when it comes to journalism is funding for great new projects, great new journalistic initiatives, which ignores what I feel is the biggest problem, which is the formats are not the right ones for the new distribution mechanisms upon which they need to be delivered upon. They're not really talking to the audience in the way that makes them excited, and nobody's really figured out that they're competing with an infinity of content. So my sense is that the real focus needs to come, and that's what we look at very much with the companies that we invest in for profit. It's not the journalism which is lacking, it's either the format or the audience or the engagement which is lacking. So I feel like there's some imbalance in the way that journalism funding seems to go. I'm not sure whether that's something that you've...
Yeah, I'm not sure the Jeff Jarvis quote, but I think the way that we look at investing is it requires a certain discipline. There are a lot of incredible, as Tori says, there's a lot of incredible journalism being created, in some cases in one-man shops. We actually have a term, we sometimes call them the IF Stones of new media, because they're incredibly focused about a particular line of coverage or a particular storyline, but they're not building an institution. And for us, an institution has to have an audience, right? You're creating something for consumption. I'm sorry to go to that, but that you're creating something for consumption. And if you're actually thinking about that, and the investment process requires you to begin thinking that way. It is media. It has a beginning and it has an exit, right? You put something in and somebody consumes it at the other end. Grants, we actually do a lot of grants. They're small, and the reason we do it is, in all honesty, the transaction cost of making the grant have a return is too high. So I'll give you an example from Burma. We do a lot of grants because people have short-term needs. They want to hire a sales executive. It's quite hard. Generally, a sales executive will actually want to see a startup's balance sheet. Do you have enough money to pay me for a year before they'll sign on? And so we'll actually grant that money because the time and legal costs to create the paper that would make it an investment is too high. But otherwise, we generally try to make something create a return because it requires an understanding of the audience and the media spectrum.
I will answer a couple of other questions. Please let me know if we are missing something here. But one is about what Adam said is what are you looking for in the companies, in the teams. So something that for us is very important is really if you are going to get in digital, you need to have a core tech team. So 3 journalists writing something is not going to scale. So that's a fact. You need a distribution, you need a guy who understands UX, you need a guy who understands metrics, so that's one thing. If the team is not really balanced, probably we would say go and find, because also it's very hard to find this kind of co-founder for media. So it's not something that you will jump on later because you trust in the journalist. So the other thing is about the money, say why we should take the money of you guys. What we look for because we had this, also journalists are very suspicious. Who is these people? Why they want to put money in these countries and what's going on here? So basically that's about trust and the institutions and the people who are running these funds. And also try to see if you have smart money, what we call smart money on the table. It's money that will help you to go to the next level. It will help you with network. It will help you with knowledge. We rejected also to work with a lot of possible like VCs, classical VCs, because people won't feel comfortable with people who has no idea about this business. And basically they will have like a long-term relationship, probably for years. So mostly if these funds are getting into the board or they want to get some participation in the board seats, be sure that you like what they've been doing before and that they are adding value. They are getting to this team to a level where you cannot get alone. So that's the main 2 things. And about the pipeline, that's a part of the thing that we've been trying to build across Latin America, to is rebuild the pipeline, so then next investor will come for next level.
To pick up on some of the other questions, so US local advertising, I think, is a fascinating space. I think that super local is one of the areas that we feel has not yet been digitized at scale. There are thousands, millions of businesses in the US. There are millions of businesses across the world that are too small to have really understood that leap to digital, to that shift to digital. And so where they tend to spend their advertising dollars are the most obvious places, so Facebook and Google. We think there are all sorts of interesting products to be built. Would love to hear what your thinking is around that. In terms of whether you should take our money, the answer is our money, you should always know that if you're taking a VC like ours money, you're designing your company to be sold. And there are a lot of media companies that should not be sold and where the entrepreneur would have no reason to sell. So being 100% clear about the incentives of the investor is fundamental. So many people should not take our kind of money. On the plus side, the reason to take a media investor's money rather than a standard VC's money is all the obvious reasons, starting with the operational side. We've all been in media. We've all built media companies. The network side, we know lots of people to put you in touch with. And finally, we should also know the people to whom you might exit one day. So there's Mariano's point is absolutely right. You're far better off with an investor who understands your market, especially media, than one who doesn't. On teams, what we look for, everything that Mariano says is right. The tech piece is fundamental. But I suppose at a slightly more abstract level, we're looking for defensibility. So I was previously talking about non-linear growth. The other thing that we look for is defensibility, and you can understand defensibility in two areas. One is around product. Do you have IP, whether it's a particular way of doing media or a particular way of distributing, whatever it happens to be, which you can defend? And the other piece of defensibility in a way is your go-to-market strategy. Have you got an understanding of how to take this to your market at scale, which is going to be able to really build that up? Both those considerations talk to a fundamental understanding of where value is. And that's what we look for. We look for a team that understands, is absolutely laser-focused on delivering value to whatever segment that they're trying to hit. I think that was it in terms of questions. Yeah.
On team, same answer as everybody else. We generally look for some mix of tech, business, and editorial. And the right mix depends a little bit on what media problem you're solving. What was the other one? We don't invest in American companies. We'd be very interested in having you solve it in the US so we can see it kind of roll into other markets. And then the last question, the kind of the ecosystem question. What would I like to see change? I think from our standpoint, we spend a lot of time looking at the vernacular. It's very easy to spend a lot of time working in the major European languages because there's a lot of innovation happening in those languages. But if you're working in Tamil or Telugu or Lao, and having greater visibility to what's happening there, and maybe it kind of goes back to Justin's networking, kind of fertilizing the ground in those markets, because there's incredibly interesting things happening. And in some cases, they're happening differently, right? If you're on the ground in India in a local vernacular language, you're doing interesting things. So solving the local ad problem, it's a very different problem in India. So making that more transparent. And for us, that's a little bit of a staffing question, it's a little bit of an understanding question, and it's a little bit of a portfolio question. So which markets are most important for that?
Questions?
Hi, speculation about BuzzFeed doing an IPO. Wondering if the panel has any thoughts on, that is kind of a new funding model for media companies as they go beyond. I mean, you're talking a lot about exits. Interested in thoughts, if anybody has any to speculate on that as a model for media companies.
If BuzzFeed does IPO, it risks being at a valuation which is lower than the last round of investment, right? And I think we were talking about it earlier, there's been this huge surge of investment in media at the last round, sort of the second phase, if you think of HuffPo as maybe the first phase. The values come off a little bit. I'm thinking of it from a historical perspective. You had the first wave of media companies basically surfs the SEO wave, when the Huffington Post is able to generate more traffic from New York Times articles than the New York Times itself. That second phase is the social phase, which is the BuzzFeeds, etc. That has been a mass explosion in value, which is now properly coming off. I wonder whether in the current ecosystem we should be looking for multiple billion-dollar companies of the kind which emerged out of this social phase now, or whether what we're going to see is less of that rush to the massive and more media companies aiming for, if BuzzFeed is a unicorn, maybe we should be looking for centaurs.
Ponies.
Or ponies, or My Little Ponies. So centaurs are described as sort of the $100 million companies, and My Little Ponies are the $30 to $50 million companies. Those are great businesses, and they also have lovely names. But they're great businesses. They deliver enormous value. They can exist in large niches, small niches. And there may be some suggestion that, in fact, in the current ecosystem, it's hard for companies to get to those very, very large multi-billion-dollar valuations. We'll see. There is a new phase coming, which I think is messaging, and I think messaging is going to create opportunities for media companies a little similar to the kind of things that social was able to do, but we're not yet there.
Yeah, in terms of trends also, yeah, the problem with content is that it doesn't scale, so it's very hard. Mostly these companies are US based. I don't know, Asia is also having some growth in that. I don't think that that's going to happen quickly in Latin America at all. I don't know what's going to happen in Africa. In terms of trends of what's possibly happening right now, I started to see a lot of interest about media investors talking about blockchain. I'm not sure why yet, but this conversation is happening. When you see like 3-4 guys, like these guys, talking about this in different markets, in different places, something is going to happen there. The other thing that is very strong is the very sexy right now, which is AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We detected a company that's Israeli and Canadian and Argentinian based that are doing a very good job on fraud detection, and they're using their technology for content, hate, harassment detection. We think that it's a big thing that's going to happen there in terms of like prediction of content performance and that kind of stuff. That's probably going to happen or is happening already in the tech side. So also we think that in Latin America, it's the market that I know more, is that big legacy media are very inefficient in a way that they distribute and produce content. So once we find like this a small BuzzFeed in the market, they will be probably much more sexy. But yeah, I think that for the market size in Latin America, they will be ponies. Yeah. I don't know if you know that pony is a small thing that usually in the parks.
Somebody wrote a piece recently in the Medium publication, Sex and Startups, called something along the lines of fewer unicorns, more zebras, and looking specifically at the kinds of startups that also deliver social returns. Are there any further questions? We're coming nearly to the end. I just want to go ahead, last one.
By now you have focused your talks and your investments obviously in emerging markets where you see strong dynamics. Does this mean, on the other hand, that in your opinion the European and the American markets are too saturated for you to be interesting as an investment area anymore?
I suppose our view as a company is that we're at high tide well, not high tide. Saturation, I think, is probably the right term. We don't think that more money is going to go into European or the US media markets. There's going to be a redistribution of that money, so away from TV into mobile, from one media company to another. But this is not a rising tide anymore. That doesn't mean that there's not potential for massive disruption and extremely successful media companies in Europe and the US. And I've seen lots of fascinating, brilliant companies in those spaces. Our thesis is simply elsewhere. We want to find the very best companies in growing markets because you get that double bump. But no, we're also seeing really interesting new models, specifically around niches which are potentially very large. None of these are companies that we've invested in, but Pink News is a company out of the UK, which I help a little bit. They've built a very successful 10 million unique bootstrapped company around LGBTQ news. Very small, very successful, profitable since the last 7 years. They're 8 years old, and doing a great job there. In Germany, a fabulous company called Edition F worked out that in fact all business news still has people like us on the front covers of the pages rather than women, and so have built a small and very fast-growing media company that has understood there was a niche to play in, content niche to play in, and has built lots of value around there in lots of interesting ways from a business model perspective. They do webinars because they've really built a community. They got a very successful classified jobs board, and on and on and on. So there are fascinating new plays there. We just don't think it's a rising tide.
Don't misunderstand. MDIF's mandate is to invest in markets that have recently undergone democratic transition, so it isn't a lack of interest. We actually spend a lot of time looking at what's happening in the US and in the EU as models, trends. I wouldn't call it best practices, but we're looking to see, so how are niche products evolving? How are they funding themselves? Is there an investment model for niche products? If they're bootstrapped, is there an exit? Do they actually need the money? Under what circumstances would they even take our money? And then looking for how we would use that information or that understanding in India, Africa, what have you. But it's not that we're not interested. Our mandate is not to invest there.
Okay, I think we're at the end. Just as the panelist who couldn't be with us, Victoria Powell, runs a growth accelerator for sort of visual content, television companies essentially in the UK. So it might be worth looking at that as an example of a more localized way of sort of helping companies find where their value is in that kind of market. One of the things that she talked about was really focusing in on those companies, helping them. What they work with them on is that they often have no idea where the value is. They're focused on their content. They're working in a very, very strong and very diverse market, but that they need a lot of the expertise through the accelerator process to become investment ready and start to think about these things. And that's in, London and the UK, which has got a very, long history. And like you say, there's not a great deal of room. So she has some particularly interesting analyses around the way that they work and how they find value in that kind of market. Indie Lab in the UK, it's called. Okay, so I wanted to bring it to a close and thank Turi, Ross, and Mariano for their inputs, and thank you for your questions.
Switch over a little bit, exactly, so that you don't sit behind the screen, because that's...
Turi Munte is from North Base Media. Ross Settles is from the Media Development Investment Fund, MDIF, which used to be called the MDLF. And before that, I think it might have been the KLF. And then Mariano Blechman is from Argentina, which is a country. And he's been involved in a range of different sort of sector building initiatives in the digital media sector in both his native Argentina and in wider Latin America, including things like Media Party, but also specifically a vehicle called, an investment vehicle, an accelerator vehicle called Media Factory. So I'm going to ask each of them initially to just talk about really what they do, the process of what they do, how they see the world, and what sorts of things they're looking for as investors, as a sort of opening way of scene setting.
They're kind of dangerous, these things. Hi, I'm Turi Munte, and I'm one of the partners in North Base Media. North Base Media is a VC, a venture capital firm, and we are absolutely not interested in supporting media. We are absolutely interested in investing in great companies which are going to make lots of money and great returns for us. And we think, unlike quite a lot of people, that media is a fascinating, fabulous space for us to be playing. We invest in two areas. We invest in media technology, technologies which will accelerate some of the trends we see in media or help to monetize them, make them more...
In South Asia, and we have a team that is just now forming in Africa and the Middle East. What do we do? My title is Senior Advisor Digital Media, which means I spend a lot of time working with companies that are preparing to require some sort of financial support. And we offer support that is quite small, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, up to a couple of $1 million. And we have different instruments and different ways of doing that. I guess that's all I can say. There's enough as an introduction. Water?
Yep. So, I have a presentation. These guys are very bad with me because I got a PDF with pictures with animals. My name is Mariano Blechman. I'm based in Buenos Aires. These people that you are seeing there is a stairway in Buenos Aires at the end of one conference that we host the last 5 years, which is 2,000 people doing great stuff about innovation in media. I will do a quick intro of what I'm doing right now. I have funded several organizations or bridges. I like to say that I'm a bridge builder. Usually, I'm sometimes not using the proper elements to build bridges. The bridges are intended to connect what people is trying to do on the ground in Latin America with funding, basically. We made a community, we launched the Hacks and Hackers Buenos Aires chapter in 2011, and now it's became the biggest in the world with 7,000 people. A part of this, we've done
efficient, optimize them. That's half our investment thesis. And the other half of our investment thesis is to invest in media companies, content companies, in, however, specific markets. Those markets that we're interested in are we call growth markets, for want of a better term. They're characterized by a number of things that they all have in common. They're large, they have large youth populations, economics are more or less stable, and they have, almost all of them have got very smug, large, existing media players in that space. So, regionally we focus on Mexico, Brazil, the whole of the Middle East, regional parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, and India.
It says push, yes. Afternoon, my name is Ross Settles. I'm with the Media Development Investment Fund. It's very aggressive, this mic. MDI is about 20 years old. It is a social investment fund. So while we like to make returns, our mandate is to make sufficient returns to cover the cost of operations, right? So we are a registered NGO, registered not-for-profit in New York. We only invest in the content half of what Tori was talking about. So we don't invest in platforms. We don't really invest in tools of any kind. We only invest in content companies or companies that are proposing to create content. We have 3 working teams. We have a team in Latin America. I work mostly in East, Southeast.
Data Journalist Acceleration Program and Media Factory was the first effort to connect early-stage media content companies with funding. And basically, we work with all these 2 guys for a couple of years. We selected around, we got around 300 companies, and we work with a few of them, and we learn a lot. You know, when you fail, you say you learn a lot. And part of this also was to build a tool to track ideas that's called hack-org. And the idea was that we were doing a lot of hackathons and workshops and a lot of things, and we found that there was too much energy in Latin America that we were not able to track. So we built a tool to track what was happening in hackathon, and now there are 5,000 tracked projects there. So we have all these people in the ground trying to do stuff, and the ecosystem of innovation in media is very short and very hard. So we learn a lot on how to communicate what people is doing, what media organizations are doing, with guys like Ross and Turi, and try to connect this work, because usually journalists has no idea how to prepare their companies or their endeavors to get funding. So that's the only thing I will talk right now. I'm happy to open the discussion, Samir. I have more pictures of animals later, so.
Well, that's a very apposite segue, because my first question, we've got 3, I'm Samir Padonia. I pulled together this panel on investors in media, partly because I worked in grant making. Philanthropy is supposed to save journalism, as we all know from the op-eds. And to me, it was always interesting that we had a relationship with groups like ones that are represented on the panel here, who have a slightly different approach to investing in the media, to sort of supporting the media through investment of various kinds. And there was a little bit of collaboration between the grant making and the investment community. But really, as somebody who's not a professional investor, not somebody who's grown up in that world, it took me some time to understand how it works, how it operates, what its tenets are, the ways in which they see the world. So this panel is an opportunity to talk to 3 people who work in various ways in a diversity of markets, but all with an overall overarching kind of mission and interest in the health and future of independent media and communication. So I hope today that's what we'll have, a discussion between these people who are highly expert and extremely interesting. We've done a lot of pre-discussion as well. So Turi raises his eyebrow. But I think what I want to do is get into it pretty quickly.